far, things have been off to a pretty interesting start. We haven't had a single series that is split so far. We've got the Nuggets are down to the Timberwolves 0-2. We've got the Thunder are up on the Mavericks 1-0 in the Western Conference. Over in the East, we've got the Celtics up 1-0, and then we've got the Knicks up 2-0 against the Pacers. Now tonight we will be catching the Celtics and the Thunder play. Celtics play at 7, Thunder play at 9:30. So there is a chance that we might see some series get evened up and bring some suspense to this playoff. But so far the suspense has just been lacking, and it has been pretty par for the course. I mean, in each position where the team is on top right now, every time it's the higher seeded team who is on top. I mean, the 3 seed Timberwolves are up on the. I take that back. The 3 seed Timberwolves are ahead of the 2 seed Nuggets. But other than that, every team that is winning is the team that you would expect based on their playoff standing. But to start off, let's get into it. We're going to get the boring matchups out of the way first. Boston's up on Cleveland 1-0. This series should be a cakewalk for Boston. I don't want to jinx things for them because you never know how things can get. All it takes is one injury and you're done, and upsets can happen. But if I'm a betting man, I'm putting all my money on Boston in this series. And game one makes me more confident in saying that because Boston laid the smackdown on the Cavs 120-95. Jaylen Brown dropped 32. He did a good job of showing why it's not just about how many points you score and how you impact the game, because he only had 18 points. He had a pretty bad shooting night. He only made 7 field goals, but he realized his shot wasn't working, and he was able to do other things on the court to impact winning and help his team. He had 11 rebounds. He played defense. He had 3 blocks, and that's just the kind of basketball I really like to see. Is just if it's not falling, don't force it, because he was taking good wide open shots. They just weren't going in for some reason, and they managed to get by, not needing Jason Tatum putting the ball in the basket this night. But that is something the Celtics should be worried about going forward, because this isn't the first game in this playoff where Jason Tatum, for whatever reason, just hadn't had a shot falling. And that's fine when you're playing the Heat in the first round, the 8th-seeded Heat, or you're playing the 4th-seeded Cavs. But that could be a problem if you make it to the conference finals and you're playing the 2-seeded Knicks, or if you're in the NBA finals and you're playing the Timberwolves or the Thunder or somebody. Like Jason Tatum, I hope he can continue to impact the game in a variety of ways, but hopefully tonight he can come out and hit some shots and show that he can get his rhythm going in this playoff, because he did get pretty lucky on Tuesday when Derek White dropped 25 and picked up some of his scoring slack. Now, Derek White is not a bad player at all, but I wouldn't be crossing my fingers expecting him to score 35 or 25 points every game in this series. Now, he's been on a hot streak lately. He got 25 against the Heat, 2 and 38 in their last 2 games of that series. So he's on a roll right now, but he's only averaging 15 points for the regular season. So I wouldn't be surprised if the more into these playoffs we get, the lower his scoring totals start to get. That's typically how it goes. As much as people complain about how soft NBA defenses are, they do tend to tighten up in the playoffs. Referees don't blow it as much, and it is what it is. But on the Cavs, they didn't really do much to make resistance. Donovan Mitchell had 33. Other than that, I mean, it's all the Celtics. I don't expect this game tonight to be any different. I think the Celtics are going to win in 5 games at the worst and be on to the next. Now, It's looking like when they go on to the next, it'll be the Knicks that they end up meeting in the conference finals, because the Knicks are up 2-0, and they've been firing on some pretty hot cylinders so far. Game 1, they won 121 to 117. Game 2, they won 130 to 121. So they've been close, but the Knicks were able to do better in Game 2 than they did in Game 1, and that is not a good thing if you're the Pacers. Now, the Pacers are going home, so you know how Indiana basketball fans are. They're dedicated, they're devout. Hopefully they can bring some good energy to try to spark a plug in their team here, but they haven't really had much to root for so far. On the Knicks side, you've got Jalen Brunson, who dropped 43 and 29 in both 2 games, respectively. Josh Hart had just been a monster on a bunch of different aspects of the game. He went 24, 8, and 3 in Game 1 and 19, 7, and 5 in Game 2. Dante DiVincenzo went 25 and 28, and I mean, the Knicks were shooting 43% from 3 in Game 1. OG Anunoby hit 28 in Game 2, and the Pacers haven't really had anybody that can respond to that. I mean, the Knicks are bringing out triple. In Game 4, it was a quadruple threat. Meanwhile, the Pacers, they had Tyrese Halliburton drop 34, and that's about it. Game 1, Miles Turner had 23. Pascal Siakam had 19. Like, the Pacers just haven't really put up much individual resistance, at least, against the Knicks. And as much as hero ball sucks, if you look at the grand scheme of NBA history, pretty much every team that's had major playoff success has had one superstar, maybe not superstar, but at least one reliable star player that can be that X factor. Like Game 1, when Jalen Brunson on the Knicks is getting 43, the Pacers need somebody that can look at that and buck up to him and really, go into his grill. And Miles Turner was the highest scoring player on the Pacers. He had 23. Jalen Brunson scored more than 20 points and the Pacers' highest scoring player. That's a whole nother player right there, just in the difference between those two. And I mean, not every series can be this historic, but it's kind of like in the 80s whenever Dominique and Larry Bird had that famous shootout in round 2 of the Eastern Conference Finals. Like, the Pacers need their Dominique. Now, granted, the Hawks lost that series, but he was still going bucket for bucket with Larry Bird, and they kind of canceled each other out, which is why the Celtics won that series, is because they had Kevin McHale and Robert Parrish to fall back on because Bird was getting canceled out by Dom. Meanwhile, all Dominique loves Spud Webb, but outside of the dunk contest, like he's not going to win you a playoff series as your second best player. I'm sure if there are any old heads watching this, you can tell me how good Tree Rollins was or Antoine Carr, but that's just off the top of my head. Doc Rivers, those 80s Hawks teams, they were decent, but they're not getting past McHale, Parrish, and Bird. I'll tell you that, and they never did. And just like that, I don't see the Pacers getting past the Knicks just because they don't have anybody that can go shot for shot with who the Knicks got, Jalen Brunson or whoever, except for Tyrese Halliburton, and he's going to have to do that consistently. And even if he does, him and Brunson can cancel each other out, but somebody else on the Pacers like Turner and Siakam have to pick up the slack too. And so far, they haven't been able to fire on the same cylinders because Halliburton wasn't doing good in Game 1 when Turner and Siakam were doing okay. And then in Game 2, Halliburton was showing out and Turner and Siakam weren't. So they're going to have to sync up for this to really turn into a series. Otherwise, the Knicks might get it in 5. I say 5 just because you never know with the Knicks when they're going to blow it. And one thing I didn't realize with the Knicks was that their coach is Tom Thibodeau. I had not realized that he was still in the NBA. And to me, he's always been one of those coaches who is the definition of mid. He will, if Tom Thibodeau is your coach, generally speaking, from like historical lenses, you'll probably be within like somewhere from the 8th to the 4th seed. Like, you'll be a decent team, a good team, like nice young talent, but he's not going to get you to the conference finals. He's not going to get you to the NBA finals. And I would love for Tibbs to knock that off his resume on this postseason run, because he's always just been one of those coaches that it's like when you look up like highest winning coaches in NBA history, there's always that one coach who's like in the top 4 that you've never heard of before, because he was coaching, and this is just a random example. I don't know if anybody actually fits this mold, but like, he coached the Nuggets in the 70s and 80s for like 20 years straight, and they were always like a first round playoff team, so they were always doing mediocre, but over time it added up to a lot of wins. So he's on the all-time list. Like, that to me is how I picture Tom Thibodeau. But I would love if he could get him a ring and go down as an all-time great coach that people actually talk about in 10, 15 years. Now on to the West, we've got the Thunder up on the Mavs, and here's the thing about the Mavericks. And honestly, this is kind of the thing about Kyrie Irving teams in general. Is if Kyrie Irving is firing, then anything can happen. Like, Kyrie, you're either going to win, or obviously you're either going to win or you're going to lose. But like Kyrie, he can get you 40 one night and come back and get you 18 the next. You just never know. He's inconsistent. And that's just kind of the vibe I've been getting from this Mavericks team. Like, you could look at him as a dark horse to make the NBA Finals if they were firing on all cylinders. They have the talent. Luka, Kyrie. Luka's a future MVP. Kyrie has that championship pedigree. He's won before. He could do it again. But in game 1, they just weren't clicking because they got thumped 117-95. Nobody on the Mavericks scored more than 20. Kyrie had 20, Luka had 19, and the rest were just down there in the gutter. Meanwhile, you had Shai Gilgeous-Alexander scoring 29, Jalen Williams had 18, Chet Holmgren had 19, and Aaron Wiggins had 16. So that's 4 players on the Thunder who scored almost as much or more than Luka, who was the Mavs' second highest scorer. It's plain and simple. You're not going to win that game. If your second highest scorer has 4 people on the other team about to even out his point total, it's just not happening. And it was a pitiful scoring game in general. Neither team shot above 45%. The Mavs shot 39%. And you can't shoot sub 40% in a playoff game and expect to come away with the win. I'm sorry. That's just not going to happen. And the Mavs had 14 turnovers to OKC's 9. OKC had 10 more assists than the Mavericks did. They shot 11% better from 3. Like, the Mavericks just had a poor game. They didn't shoot good. They didn't pass good. They didn't play defense good. And when you don't do anything good, you're not going to win. That can be the big takeaway from this episode of the Water Cooler. Play good and you win. Play bad and you don't. And it's funny to me how simple and complicated basketball is at the same time. 15 turnovers. When Kyrie Irving is your main point guard and you're in an NBA playoff series and you're the underdog, everybody should be locked in. You shouldn't be turning the ball over like crazy. And that's always been my biggest gripe against point guards like Kyrie. Those love him, but Allen Iverson and his progeny, the people that he influenced to become point guards, who are really just shooting guards that are really short and play the 1, they are not good team leaders, because the job of the point guard is to set the tempo, to feed the other players on the team, and to make sure the offense is flowing and that everybody is eating and getting a little bit of the love. And Kyrie has just never been that player. He's a good shooter. He's a great finisher. He's one of the most clutch players when it comes down to the nitty-gritty in NBA history, but he averages 5 assists a game. And I know it's not just about how many assists you get on what makes a good point guard, but to me, if you're a pass first or if you're a shoot first point guard and you're not getting assists, then you got to at least be a defensive stopper or have some sort of offensive like leadership X factor. And Kyrie is only getting 1 steal a game. He's definitely not a leader as far as locker room morale and stuff goes. And it's like your point guard's supposed to be a floor general, and Kyrie doesn't do any of that. And Luka is only like 24, 25 years old, so he's 25, and he's your point guard, he's 6'7", and he's your point guard. Like, that's just crazy to me. Now Luka, he has been doing better. He got 9 assists, but I don't know. It's just, to me, Kyrie should be able to take over that point guard role. He's the one who's experienced. He's a veteran, and he just doesn't do it. And to me, as long as he's unable to perform that function for the Mavericks, I don't think they're going to go far. Now, the most interesting series in this second round to date has been the Timberwolves and Denver. Now, I don't want to be a prisoner of the moment and get too excited too early, but I'm going to be a prisoner of the moment and get excited too early because I think Anthony Edwards, if he can continue on this pace, we might be seeing the next big thing burgeon before our very eyes because he is 22 years old. And in the last 2 games against the Nuggets, who have the reigning MVP, he has been the MVP of this series. He's been the best player on the floor when he's looking across the court from a 3-time MVP. He dropped 43 points in Game 1 and 27 points in Game 2. And in Game 2, not only did he have 27 points, he had 7 assists as well. So he's able to affect the game in multiple different ways, just like I was bragging about Jason Tatum earlier. And to me, that's what makes the difference between a good player, flash in the pan player, and an all-time great. Because we've seen a lot of players, Grant Hill, Tracy McGrady, Penny Hardaway, who are great scorers. And Penny's a good passer too, but he's more of a scorer in general. But that's all they got. And then they get hurt, and they're never the same again because they don't have anything else they can fall back on. If you can develop an all-around game, that adds so much to your arsenal. It adds so much to your career, and that can make or break you between being a flash in the pan and a legend. So I think it's great seeing Anthony Edwards at 22 years old already having some version of passing skills. Now, Karl Anthony Towns, he dropped 20 and 27 respectively, so he's doing a good job. They're kind of splitting the load here. Anthony Edwards is a great high-scoring wing. Cat's holding it down in the paint, and I think that combo is going to be too much for the Nuggets to overcome. Because usually on the Nuggets, when they have that combo of their own, it's Joker who's holding it down in the paint and Jamal Murray who's tearing it up from the wing. And Jamal Murray has been getting tore up more than he's been tearing anything up in this series. In Game 1, Jamal Murray had 17 points and shot 6 of 14. So not a good shooting night for Jamal. Not horrible, but not a great way to get the series started, especially when Joker had 32, 9, and 8, and you only lose by 7 points. It was 106 to 99. So, I mean, you can always nitpick when you look at the stats in hindsight, but Jamal Murray shoots a little bit better. That game could turn out a little bit different. And based on his reaction in Game 2, clearly he understood that and is getting frustrated because in Game 2, Jamal Murray scored 8 points on 3 of 18 from shooting. 3 of 18. And you could tell he was getting frustrated because he was throwing stuff on the court. He got fined $100,000 for throwing a heating pad on the floor. Then after the game, they asked him about it. He pitched a tantrum. Here's the response, the Q&A after the game when it was sometime after the game when it was announced what his punishment would be. A reporter said, "Did you expect any punishment from the league office? Was it fair?" Jamal Murray said, "Nah, I mean, it is what it is, and I take everything in full responsibility, so on to the next." Was it just frustration boiling over? Yeah, on to the next. It was 2 days ago. Not much for me to say about it right now. Were there any conversations you had with league people just to apologize or whatever? Do you have any basketball questions? No? That exchange right there with reporters is something players do a lot when they're struggling, and I understand the inclination to do it, but it's just so counterproductive, and it really doesn't reflect well on their coaching or their leadership in general. Look, if you have a bad game, it sucks. Anybody who has ever played sports has had a bad game. You can't just pretend like it didn't happen, and especially when you're an NBA player. When you're at that level and you shoot 3 of 18 from the field, you don't get to say on to the next in the press conference whenever they ask you about it. You're going to have to sit, you're going to have to marinate in that jacuzzi full of turds that was your performance, and you're going to have to talk to the media. That's just a part of the job. You're getting paid millions of dollars. That's just part of it. And anytime somebody asks you a valid question, you can't just deflect. It's kind of like when Triple H, when he was doing the Royal Rumble press conference, after all the scandal came out about Vince McMahon, somebody asked him about it. And Triple H said, "I don't want to focus on the negatives right now. I want to focus on the positives and what a great show we just put on." When you're the COO or CEO or whatever job position Triple H has in that company, you don't get to just focus on the positives. Life is positive and negative, and you have to focus on both. And when you're in a spokesperson position or a position of authority, you're going to get asked about positive and negatives, and you've got to have genuine, decent responses to both. And Jamal Murray saying on to the next just really reflects his lack of leadership and his lack of experience in these high-pressure situations. Because pure and simple, he wilted, and the way he responded to that questioning doesn't give me much hope that he's going to be able to get out of the slump for Game 3. And that's a shame because Jokic, he played a heck of a game in Game 1. Game 2, not so much. He scored 16, 8, and 16. So, I mean, a good all-around game. But he shot 5 of 13 from the field. And because Murray didn't show out, it seems like the Timberwolves defense was really able to go in and zone in on Jokic. And he wasn't able to carry the team on his own. I mean, they only shot 35% from the field. Granted, most of that was probably just Jamal Murray. But when you compare that to the Timberwolves shooting 50% from the field and 39% from three compared to Denver's 30%, it's just not a recipe for winning. Also, I should add that right after this game, they announced that Joker won his third MVP in 4 seasons. He became one of only 7 players to do that, 3 MVPs in 4 seasons. The other players in the order that they did it are Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Magic Johnson, or Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, and LeBron James. Now, for those of you wondering, what about MJ? What about MJ? MJ just missed it. MJ holds the record or actually he's second for most MVPs. Kareem holds the record for most MVPs, but MJ won it in 88, 91, 92, 96, and 98. So that period of 88 to 92, he just missed it by a season. He won 3 in 5 years, not 3 and 4. So unfortunately for MJ, didn't quite get it. Same thing for Moses Malone. He won the MVP in 79, 82, and 83. So he got 3 and 5 instead of 3 and 4, which puts Jokic in rarefied air. However, one of the biggest flaws in Jokic's game, at least that gets him criticized the most, because it's pretty hard to criticize Jokic on most of his game, but he's not a good defender. His career block totals are .9 a game, and he has only had one block in the series with the Timberwolves so far. And you can tell because in points in the paint, they had 52 points in the paint in Game 1 compared to the Nuggets' 42. And they had 52 points in the paint in Game 2 compared to the Nuggets' 34. So Jokic, for once, if they're not going to win because of offense, he's going to have to show out on defense and actually be a defensive anchor and try to do something to block the lane. Because if Ant-Man keeps dropping 43 and 27 and what have you, and Karl Anthony Towns dropping 20 and 27, I'm assuming most of both of their points are coming from the paint. So Jokic is going to have to figure something out to clamp down there, or else the Nuggets don't really have a chance in this series. To be completely transparent, like, it's all about three-pointers and scoring inside. That's what all this analytics crap is about these days, is the most valuable baskets in NBA are three-pointers and layups. And so far, to quote Chip Rice, the Timberwolves have been running a three-ring circus around the Nuggets, and they've been getting as many threes and as many layups as they want. And, I mean, you're not going to win when you do that. Like, basketball is a very simple game, and most of the time when you're dissecting a team and what can you do better, well, now it's easier said than done. Stop Anthony Edwards from driving to the basket and dunking and putting people on posters. So I understand that, like, it's easier said than done. However, when you are a 7-foot-tall Serbian man who weighs like 230 pounds, you should be able to handle anybody that comes your way in the basket. So hopefully the Nuggets can show some life, but I'm thinking the Timberwolves are going to be on their way to their first Western Conference Finals in the non-Kevin Garnett era. And it'll be exciting to see, especially if we get to see the Thunder versus the Timberwolves, and we get to see Shai Gilgeous-Alexander versus Anthony Edwards, because that could be the rivalry that shapes the NBA for the next decade or so. I mean, that could be a battle of two future legends in their young days. So if that's what we get, I suggest everybody sit down and watch and bask in the future, because that's what we're looking at right now. Now, to go back to the past for a second, one person who was a little miffed that Joker won 3 MVPs in 4 years is Shaquille O'Neal, because Shaq thinks it's crazy that Jokic has more MVPs than he does. Now, I think Shaq has a valid point that Shaq should have won more MVPs. And if you listen to Shaq talk, he always gripes on the fact that Steve Nash had 2 more MVPs than he does, which is honestly fair. If you look at Shaq's, okay, it's hard to judge, to be completely honest, because if you look at Shaq won the MVP in 2000. And that's undisputed. That was prime Shaq. Nobody was even close to touching Shaq that year. However, in 2001, Allen Iverson won the MVP. And that was the year Allen Iverson led the 76ers to the NBA Finals when he dropped like 40 points in game one. And AI was just that guy that year. And I don't even think Shaq disputes the fact that AI should have won the MVP that season. Because, I mean, if you look at what he was able to do with the 76ers and just how much he on his own meant to that team, I don't think you can really make an argument for anybody but AI that season. Now, 2001, 2002, and 2002, 2003, those are the strongest arguments. If you're going to argue that Shaq should have won an MVP, that's what it should have been, because those are the 2 years that Tim Duncan won the MVP. And the problem with that, if you're Shaq, is that at least in one of those years, the Spurs won the championship. So it's pretty hard to argue against him there. But if you're just going based off of the numbers, here's Shaq versus Tim Duncan in the 2001-2002 season. Shaq had 27 points a game, 2 blocks, 3 assists, and 10 rebounds on 57.9 or on 57% from the field. Meanwhile, Tim Duncan had 25 points a game, 2.5 blocks, so that's 0.5 more than Shaq, even though he had about 2 less points a game, 3.7 assists, 12.4 rebounds, which is 2 more than Shaq, and 50% from the field. So worse than Shaq. I mean, given that the Lakers won the championship that year, I'd give that one to Shaq. After that, it pretty much, there's no, I mean, the Spurs won the championship the next year. Duncan only had 23 compared to Shaq's 27 points a game. So if you're just going numbers, then it should have been Duncan, but I think that was more of a team success year. So I'll give it to Shaq. He should have won more MVPs, but I don't really know of anybody this year that was more deserving than Joker. Now, outside of the basketball world, because there are other sports going on, I know the last 3 weeks have pretty much just all been NBA Finals talk, but Canelo Alvarez dominated Munguia last weekend. He won a unanimous decision. If you watched the fight, it was pretty clear that Canelo was the better man in that ring, and that's exactly what I said was going to happen going into it. Now, Canelo, he does have a history of getting upset in fights that he should win, but I said if he went out and he was Canelo, then it was going to be a cakewalk, and it pretty much was. So Munguia threw more punches than Canelo did. He threw 663 punches to Canelo's 536. But Canelo connected more, 234 to 170 punches. Now, just for exercise sake, go out and punch something 663 times in the span, boxing in 36 minutes. Because boxing rounds are 3 minutes or 12 rounds, so 36 minutes of actual fighting take place in a boxing match. Just go punch something 663 times and see how sore your arms are the next day. Now imagine that thing you're punching can punch back. I think sometimes when you actually look at the numbers in a boxing match, it really puts things in perspective for you. Because that's just crazy. Now, that's just punches thrown. Poor Munguia. Imagine getting punched 234 times in a 36-minute span. Forget who's punching you. You could have like a 5-year-old son. Pretend he punches you 234 times. That might make you a little tender. Now imagine instead of your like 5-year-old son or whoever, it's Canelo Alvarez. Like, that's just insane to actually look at the numbers of boxing matches. You see how many times you get punched in the face by one of the toughest individuals walking this earth. Now that we've got Canelo's fight out of the way, this upcoming week will be Tyson Fury's fight, and that's on the 18th, so be sure to tune in next week for that because I'm going to have all the coverage. We're going to go in depth on why it's been postponed twice, who's going to win, and all that good stuff. And, I really hope now that Canelo Alvarez's slate is clear for the foreseeable future, him and Terrence Crawford can finally sit down and figure this thing out. Because now that Canelo fought again, everybody's talking about it, and I keep talking about it because it's the most exciting non-heavyweight fight boxing could do right now. And they're not doing it, and it drives me crazy. The amount of that would be the biggest money fight Canelo Alvarez has had in his career, except for his fight with Floyd Mayweather. And like Floyd Mayweather, his literal nickname is Money, so you can't really compare that. Like that, maybe the Triple G fights, maybe. But this will be the biggest box office draw Canelo has had in like 10 years because it's been a minute since those prime Triple G fights. Nobody counts the third one. That was the equivalent of Ali versus Floyd Patterson when Floyd Patterson was washed and Ali was just trying to give him a payday. But boxing, figure it out, make it happen because I want to give you my money and you just won't take it for whatever reason. Sit these two dudes in a room, figure out the weight classes, figure out the money, make it happen. And with that being said, that's a wrap on this week's episode of The Water Cooler, and I will see you guys next week.